Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The month-long saga turned nightmare of Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court confirmation process finally coming to a conclusion. The Senate voted narrowly today to move the decision to the floor. That means the final vote on this, on Kavanaugh, will take place tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. This is almost over. Democrats made one final push against Kavanaugh this afternoon. Screaming protesters swarmed the Capitol. Famous journalists became completely hysterical on Twitter. Check the blue checks and you will see for yourself. And then Dianne Feinstein, the 85-year-old ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, someone long holding a reputation for being reasonable, abandoned that reputation and went all the way. She suggested that Brett Kavanaugh isn't simply a bad nominee or a bad jurist, but he is a violent and dangerous person. Here's part of it.
At the hearing last week, we saw a man filled with anger and aggression. Judge Kavanaugh raised his voice. He interrupted senators. This behavior revealed a hostility and belligerence that is unbecoming of someone seeking to be elevated to the United States Supreme Court.
Lock that man up. Well, for much of the day, Brett Kavanaugh's fate seemed uncertain. It ping-ponged back and forth. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska wound up voting with the Democrats. And then she issued a bizarre statement in which she said that Kavanaugh is a good man, but should not be on the Supreme Court. In other words, Brett Kavanaugh was falsely accused of gang rape, and that false accusation means he can't be a Supreme Court justice because false accusations are disqualifying for the victims of them. Keep in mind that Lisa Murkowski is an actual U.S. senator. Hard to believe, but true. And then in the mid-afternoon, something remarkable happened, something that very few expected. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, one of the most liberal Republicans in Washington, and not someone famous for memorable oratory, took to the Senate floor to mount a rigorously logical defense of Kavanaugh's character, ability, and nomination. Here's part of what she said.
The facts presented do not mean that Professor Ford was not sexually assaulted that night or at some other time, but they do lead me to conclude that the allegations failed to meet the more likely than not standard. Therefore, I do not believe that these charges can fairly prevent Judge Kavanaugh from serving on the court. Mr. President, I will vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh. Thank you, Mr. President.
This was not an emotional speech, and for that reason, it was very different from virtually anything we've heard for the past month. It was an argument rooted in reason, and it had a huge effect. The dam broke almost immediately after. West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin announced that he, too, will support Kavanaugh. Manchin gives the nomination the necessary 50 votes. Even if protesters find Jeff Flake again and scream at him once more, the nomination will go through. Barring some unforeseen event, and we've got to be honest, that could happen, but if it doesn't, Brett Kavanaugh will become a Supreme Court justice this weekend. Now, for the crime of representing his own voters back in West Virginia who overwhelmingly support Kavanaugh, Senator Manchin was surrounded tonight by the youth wing of his own party and ritually denounced in the halls of the Capitol. As is common now, nobody tried to stop them or even ask them to be quiet because we're getting used to mob rule here. Watch.
Shame on you! Shame on you! South Carolina.
These kinds of scenes are everywhere in Washington tonight, we're sad to tell you. The left has given up on making its own case. Activists no longer try to convince anyone of anything. Instead, they scream and bully. As a tactic, this can be effective. It worked for many years for the mafia, for example. But there is a cost to it, especially when it's on television. Normal people find it scary and unreasonable because that's exactly what it is, scary and unreasonable. The left is going too far, and it's alienating even liberal Republicans like Susan Collins.
I am thinking in particular not of the allegations raised by Professor Ford, but of the allegation that when he was a teenager, Judge Kavanaugh drugged multiple girls and used their weakened state to facilitate gang rape. This outlandish allegation was put forth without any credible supporting evidence.
That outlandish story Senator Collins is referring to, of course, was all over the other cable channels, repeated uncritically for weeks. It was, of course, a fantasy. It was promoted by Stormy Daniels' attorney, the world's creepiest porn lawyer, who is now, by the way, a leading Democratic presidential candidate, if that tells you anything about the moment we're living in. He, creepy porn lawyer, lashed out at Susan Collins on Twitter today. He called her speech, quote, entirely disingenuous and shameful. But by this point, even Democrats were starting to understand that the freak show they have unleashed is beginning to hurt them. Ken Vogel at the New York Times even wondered aloud on Twitter if the creepy porn lawyer might be, quote, a double agent all along, working for the Republicans. Unlikely, but he's helped them. Out in the field, though, they never got the memo, the one about trying to seem non-crazy for the sake of not scaring the voters. Progressive leader Linda Sarsour spoke for many on the left when she attacked Susan Collins for the color of her skin. Quote, Senator Susan Collins is the mother and grandmother of white women in America who gave us a Donald Trump presidency. Whatever that means, they're all saying it. Over at GQ magazine, writer Sophia Benoit wrote this, quote, if I ever die from getting an illegal abortion, please drop my body off at Senator Collins' house and let it rot. Well, if there's one thing we've learned during the last month, it's what the activist left really thinks. And a lot of people are scared by what they really think. Though actually the term think may be too generous. A lot of what we're hearing isn't the product of thinking at all. It's the product of coordinated instructions handed down from on high and dutifully repeated by angry children. Liberals are party people. They do exactly what they are told. Watch this scene today from Capitol Hill, which really says it all.
Let's go watch the vote.
Let's go watch the vote.
In offices that you wish to communicate with.
In offices you wish to communicate with.
I am going to go to Heidi Heitkamp's office.
I'm going to go to Heidi Heitkamp's office.
Why? She's on our side.
Repeat after me. And like the little robots they are, they do. During her speech, Susan Collins noted that Supreme Court nomination battles have become steadily angrier and more vicious over the course of 30 years. She said she hopes what happened to Brett Kavanaugh is rock bottom, and it gets better from here. Of course, we and a lot of other people hope she's right. We worry that she isn't. The effort to destroy Brett Kavanaugh's life failed, apparently, but only barely. Nobody important seems to regret what happened to him. Norms like the presumption of innocence and basic fairness, the ones this country is built on, remain intact, but they've been damaged. They may crumble if they are attacked again. Will they be? Well, that really depends on voters. If voters reward mob justice in November, the screaming robots you just saw on your screen, we're going to get more of it, because that's the way the system works. If voters reject it, the Democrats may rethink the strategy and get back to arguing on behalf of what they say they believe, which would be a massive improvement over sending out their youth wing to scream at people. For once, these midterms really matter. They will determine the course of the Democratic Party going forward.